The wind cut through Abigail Jensen like 1,000 frozen knives as she twisted the final wire around the fence post, her fingers so numb she could barely feel whether she had a grip on the pliers anymore. February 1882 had brought the worst blizzard southeastern Colorado had seen in a decade, and here she was, 23 years old and stubborn. As the day was long, refusing to let her late father's ranch fall into disrepair just because the weather had turned vicious. The fence line stretched another 100 yards before her, sagging and broken in at least 4 more places, and the snow fell so thick she could barely see 10 feet ahead. She had been out here since dawn, which meant nearly 4 hours of brutal work in conditions that would have sent most men running for shelter. Her hands were cracked and bleeding beneath her worn leather gloves. Her face felt like it might shatter if she tried to smile, and somewhere in the last hour she had lost feeling in her toes completely. But the cattle needed to stay contained, and the neighboring rancher, old Herman Dockery, had already made it clear he would shoot any of her livestock that wandered onto his property. She could not afford to lose a single head of cattle, not with the bank breathing down her neck about the loan her father had taken out 6 months before he died. The thought of her father made her chest tighten. 3 months ago, Jonas Jensen had been thrown from his horse while trying to round up strays during a storm. He had broken his neck on impact, dying instantly, according to Doc Pemberton. One moment Abigail had a father, gruff but loving, teaching her everything he knew about ranching. The next moment she was alone, inheriting 200 acres of struggling land, 40 head of cattle, and debts that seemed to multiply every time she looked at the ledger. She fumbled with the wire cutters, trying to snip a fresh length to repair the next broken section. The metal was so cold it burned her palms even through the gloves. Snow had accumulated on her hat brim, periodically dumping down the back of her coat collar in icy rivulets that made her gasp. Her mare, Clementine, stood 20 yards behind her with her rump to the wind, head down, looking as miserable as Abigail felt. The sound of hoofbeats barely registered at first. The wind carried so much noise, howling and shrieking across the open prairie, that Abigail dismissed it as another trick of the storm. But then she heard it again, closer, more deliberate. She straightened up, squinting through the white curtain of falling snow, one hand moving instinctively to the rifle she kept strapped to her saddle. A dark shape emerged from the blizzard, resolving itself into a horse and rider. The horse was a sturdy buckskin, and the man sitting tall in the saddle wore a heavy sheepskin coat and a wide-brimmed hat pulled low against the wind. He rode with the easy confidence of someone who spent more time on horseback than on foot. And even through the storm, Abigail could see he was a big man, broad-shouldered and solid. He pulled up about 15 feet away, and when he tilted his head to look at her, she caught a glimpse of a strong jaw shadowed with several days of stubble and eyes so blue they seemed to cut through the gray and white of the storm like chips of summer sky. "Madam?" he called out, his voice deep and carrying despite the wind. "You fixing fence in this weather?" "What does it look like?" Abigail shot back, irritation sharpening her tone. She did not have time for stupid questions or nosy strangers. Every minute she stood here talking was another minute her hands froze and her cattle remained at risk. The man swung down from his saddle with fluid grace, landing solidly in the knee-deep snow. He was even bigger on foot, probably 6'2" at least, with shoulders that strained the seams of his coat. He approached her with long strides, and up close she could see that his face was weathered but handsome in a rough-hewn way, probably somewhere in his mid-20s. A scar cut through his right eyebrow, giving him a slightly dangerous look that made something in her stomach flutter, despite her best efforts to remain annoyed. "Name is Wade Brennan," he said, reaching out one gloved hand. "I have been riding fence lines for the triple bar spread, checking for storm damage. I saw you out here and figured no one in their right mind would be working in these conditions unless they were desperate or foolish." "Well, I am desperate," Abigail said, ignoring his offered hand and turning back to her work. "And maybe a bit foolish too, but this fence is not going to fix itself, and I cannot afford to lose cattle." Wade lowered his hand, studying her for a long moment. She could feel his gaze on her like a physical weight, taking in her threadbare coat, the worn-out boots, the way her whole body shook with cold. When he spoke again, his voice had softened. "You are going to lose more than cattle if you stay out here much longer. You're half frozen already." "I will be fine," Abigail insisted, but even as she said it, she fumbled the wire cutters and they fell into the snow. She bent to retrieve them, but her knees buckled unexpectedly and she would have fallen if Wade had not caught her arm. His grip was firm but gentle, steadying her until she found her feet again. Even through layers of clothing, she could feel the warmth and strength of his hand, and for just a moment she let herself lean into that support, too tired and cold to maintain her fierce independence. "No, you will not be fine," Wade said, his voice taking on a note of command that reminded her of her father. "This blizzard is getting worse, not better. Temperature's dropping fast, and I would bet money you have not eaten anything hot since yesterday." He was right, damn him. Abigail had choked down some cold cornbread and jerky at dawn, but there had been no time for a proper breakfast, and her stomach had been growling for the last hour. But admitting weakness felt like surrendering, and she had learned young that showing vulnerability on the frontier was a good way to get taken advantage of. "I have 3 more breaks to fix," she said stubbornly, pulling away from his grip. "Once those are done, I will head back." Wade looked at the fence line, then at the darkening sky, then back at Abigail. His jaw tightened, and she saw a muscle jump in his cheek. Then, without warning, he reached out and plucked the wire cutters from her frozen fingers. "Hey," she protested, making a grab for them, but he held them easily out of her reach. "You are done for today," he said flatly. "I am taking you somewhere warm before you freeze to death out here. You can argue with me all you want, but I am bigger than you, stronger than you, and I am not leaving you alone in this storm." Abigail felt a flash of genuine anger. "You have got no right to tell me what to do. This is my land, my fence, my responsibility." "And you are no good to this ranch dead," Wade countered. Wade, his blue eyes held hers, and she saw genuine concern there, mixed with an iron determination that told her he meant every word. "I have seen men die of exposure in weather like this. Hell, I have seen it happen in less than an hour when they were wet and worn out like you are right now. Your lips are blue, you can barely stand, and your hands are shaking so bad I doubt you could tie a knot even if you tried." She wanted to argue, wanted to push back against this stranger who thought he could just ride up and take control of her life. But exhaustion was a heavy weight on her shoulders, and the cold had seeped so deep into her bones that even the thought of staying out here another hour made her want to weep. Her father had taught her to be strong, to be self-reliant, but he had also taught her not to be stupid. And staying out in this storm was definitely stupid. "Fine," she said through gritted teeth, "but I'm coming back out tomorrow to finish this." "If the weather clears, I will help you more," Wade said, and the easy way he made the offer startled her. People did not just help for free, not in her experience. There was always a price, always an expectation. "Why would you do that?" she asked suspiciously. Wade shrugged, a small smile tugging at the corner of his mouth. "Because that is what neighbors do. Now come on before we both turn into ice sculptures." He walked over to her mare, checking the saddle rigging with practiced efficiency, then led the horse over to where Abigail stood swaying in the wind. Before she could protest, he had his hands on her waist and was lifting her into the saddle as easily as if she weighed nothing at all. The casual display of strength made her breath catch, and she found herself gripping the saddle horn to steady herself, as much from surprise as from cold. Wade swung up onto his own horse, taking the reins of her mare in one hand. "Where is your place?" 2 miles south, Abigail said, pointing in what she hoped was the right direction. The storm had disoriented her more than she wanted to admit. "But there is no heat. I have been trying to conserve firewood." Wade shook his head. "We are not going there. My line shack is just over the next rise, maybe half a mile. It has a stove, firewood, and supplies. You need to get warm now, not in an hour." Abigail opened her mouth to argue again, But Wade was already urging his horse forward, leading her mare along behind. She supposed she should feel afraid going off to an isolated cabin with a strange man she had known for all of 10 minutes. But something about Wade Brennan felt solid and trustworthy in a way she could not quite explain. Maybe it was the way he had looked at her with genuine concern rather than opportunistic interest. Maybe it was the matter-of-fact way he had taken charge, not trying to dominate her but simply doing what needed to be done. Or maybe she was just too cold and tired to care anymore. The ride to the line shack felt like it took forever, though it probably was less than 15 minutes. The wind had picked up even more, and visibility had dropped to almost nothing. Abigail hunched down in her saddle, trusting Wade to know where he was going. Her mind had started to feel fuzzy around the edges, thoughts coming slow and disconnected. She barely registered when they stopped, barely felt Wade lifting her down from the saddle. "Stay with me," he was saying, his voice coming from what seemed like a great distance. Just a few more steps. Then there was the blessed relief of getting out of the wind, the sound of a door slamming shut behind them, and the smell of old smoke and leather and coffee. Wade guided her to a chair near a cold stove, and she collapsed into it gratefully. "Do not fall asleep," he ordered, already moving around the small cabin with purposeful efficiency. She heard him opening the stove door, the scratch of a match, the crackle of kindling catching fire. More sounds followed, water being poured into a kettle, the clink of a coffee pot, the rustle of blankets being pulled from somewhere. Then Wade was kneeling in front of her, and his hands were on her boots, tugging them off carefully. She tried to protest, tried to tell him she could do it herself, but her tongue felt thick and clumsy in her mouth. He pulled off her wet socks too, and she heard him hiss softly. "Your feet are in bad shape," he said quietly, "but I do not think you have frostbite yet. We got you inside just in time." He wrapped her feet in something soft and dry, then moved to her hands, peeling off the wet gloves with careful gentleness. His touch was warm, his fingers calloused but surprisingly tender as he examined her cracked and bleeding palms. "These need to be cleaned and bandaged," he murmured, more to himself than to her, but first we get you warm." He draped a heavy wool blanket around her shoulders, then another one over her lap. The stove was starting to put out heat now, and Abigail felt it like a physical caress on her frozen skin. But with the warmth came pain, 1,000 needles of agony as blood began to flow back into her extremities. She bit her lip, trying not to cry out, but a small whimper escaped despite her best efforts. "I know it hurts," Wade said, his voice low and soothing, "but that is a good sign. Means there is no permanent damage. Just breathe through it." He stood up and went back to the stove, and soon the smell of coffee filled the small cabin. Abigail looked around, taking in her surroundings properly for the first time. The line shack was small but well maintained, maybe 12 feet by 12 feet, with a bunk built into one wall, a table with 2 chairs, shelves holding supplies, and the stove that was now pumping out blessed warmth. A window with shutters looked out onto the storm, and hooks on the wall held spare tack and a couple of coats. Wade came back with a tin cup of coffee, holding it carefully. "This is going to be hot. I am going to help you drink it." Abigail wanted to insist she could manage, but when she tried to lift her hands, they shook so badly she nearly knocked the cup away. Wade sat down on the other chair, pulled it close to hers, and raised the cup to her lips. She sipped carefully, and the hot liquid was like salvation, burning a path down her throat and into her stomach, spreading warmth from the inside out. "Slowly," Wade cautioned when she tried to gulp. "Just small sips. Your body needs time to adjust." They sat like that for several minutes, Wade patiently holding the cup while Abigail drank, the storm raging outside, the stove crackling cheerfully. The intimacy of the moment was not lost on her. This strange man caring for her with a gentleness that made her throat tighten with unexpected emotion. When was the last time someone had taken care of her? Not since her mother died when she was 14, certainly not since her father had passed. She had been on her own, fighting every day just to survive, and she had forgotten what it felt like to lean on someone else, even for just a moment. "Thank you," she said quietly when the cup was empty. Her voice came out rough and hoarse from the cold. "I think you might have saved my life." Wade set the cup aside and met her eyes. Up close, his gaze was intense, almost overwhelming in its directness. "You were doing a brave thing out there, trying to protect your ranch. But bravery does not mean much if you are dead." "I did not have a choice," Abigail said, some of her earlier defensiveness creeping back. "That fence had to be fixed." "There is always a choice," Wade said. "You could have waited for the storm to pass. You could have asked for help. Hell, you could have let the fence go and dealt with the consequences later." "Easy for you to say," Abigail shot back, anger giving her strength. "You are not the one trying to hold onto a failing ranch with nothing but stubbornness and prayer. You are not the one who has to prove to every man in the county that you have just as much right to be here as they do." Wade studied her for a long moment, his expression unreadable. Then he stood up and went back to the stove, ladling something from a pot she had not noticed he had put on. "You are right," he said finally. "I do not know what it is like to be in your position, but I know what it is like to lose everything. I know what it is like to have to claw your way back from nothing." He brought over a bowl of something that steamed and smelled incredible. "Now eat this. It is just beans and salt pork, but it is hot and it will give you strength." Abigail took the bowl with hands that still trembled but were starting to work properly again. She ate slowly, savoring every bite. While Wade moved around the cabin taking care of the horses, she could hear him outside settling the animals in what must be a lean-to attached to the shack, making sure they had feed and water. The level of care he showed the animals told her a lot about his character. By the time he came back inside, stamping snow off his boots, she had finished the beans and was feeling almost human again. The color had returned to her hands and feet, though they still ached something fierce, and the warmth from the stove had seeped into her bones. Wade hung up his coat and hat, revealing sandy brown hair that curled slightly at his collar and a lean, muscular build that his work shirt did nothing to hide. He moved with the unconscious grace of someone completely comfortable in his own body, and Abigail found herself watching him with an interest that had nothing to do with gratitude and everything to do with the fact that he was quite possibly the most handsome man she had ever seen. He caught her staring and raised an eyebrow, a slight smile playing at his lips. She felt heat rush to her cheeks and looked down at her empty bowl, cursing her fair complexion that showed every blush. "How are you feeling?" he asked, coming to sit across from her again. "Better," she admitted. "Much better. I think I owe you an apology for being so rude earlier." Wade waved a hand dismissively. "You were cold, scared, and trying to protect what is yours. I took no offense." "Still," Abigail insisted, "you have been nothing but kind, and I have been nothing but prickly. My father always said my pride would be the death of me." "Your father was Jonas Jensen, right?" Wade asked. At her surprised look, he explained, "I heard about his passing. I am sorry for your loss. He had a reputation as a good man and a fair rancher." Abigail felt her eyes prickle with unexpected tears. "He was the best man I ever knew, and now I am trying my damnedest not to let him down by losing everything he worked for." "You are not going to lose it," Wade said with quiet conviction. "You are too tough for that." "You do not know that," Abigail said, but something in his certainty made her want to believe him. "I know that anyone stubborn enough to fix fence in a blizzard has got the grit to make it through just about anything." Wade leaned forward, his elbows on his knees, his blue eyes holding hers. "But here is the thing about grit. It works a whole lot better when you are smart enough to accept help when it is offered." "And you are offering help?" Abigail asked skeptically. "Just like that? You do not even know me." "I know enough," Wade said simply. "I know you are working yourself to the bone trying to keep your ranch going. I know you have not got hired help, because if you did, you would not have been out in that storm alone. I know you are proud and independent and probably have not asked anyone for anything since your father died." Every word was true, and hearing it laid out so plainly made Abigail feel exposed and vulnerable. She wrapped the blanket tighter around herself, as much for emotional protection as physical warmth. "Why do you care?" she asked quietly. Wade was silent for a moment, and when he spoke, his voice was thoughtful. "About 6 years ago, I was 17 and on my own after my parents died of cholera. I did not have a ranch or land or anything except a horse, a saddle, and a rifle. I was angry and scared and too proud to admit I needed help. I probably would have ended up dead or outlawed if a rancher named Tom Bailey had not taken a chance on me. He gave me work, taught me the cattle business, treated me like family. He died last year, left me a small piece of land and some money. It is not much, but it is a start." He met her eyes again. "I guess I figure if someone was willing to help me when I had nothing, I can do the same for someone else." The simple honesty in his words cut through all of Abigail's defenses. She found herself blinking back tears, overwhelmed by exhaustion and emotion, and the sheer relief of not having to be strong for just a few minutes. "I do not know what to say," she managed. "You do not have to say anything," Wade said gently. "Just let yourself rest for a bit. The storm is not letting up anytime soon, so we are stuck here for the night. You take the bunk. I will make a bedroll on the floor." "I cannot take your bed," Abigail protested automatically. Wade gave her a look that was equal parts amused and exasperated. "You are the most stubborn woman I have ever met, and that is saying something. Now stop arguing and get some rest. Your body needs it." Abigail was too tired to argue anymore. She made her way to the bunk, still wrapped in blankets, and stretched out on the surprisingly comfortable mattress. She had intended to stay awake to maintain some semblance of propriety, but her body had other ideas. Within minutes, the warmth of the stove and the exhaustion of the day dragged her down into deep, dreamless sleep. She woke once in the night to find the cabin dark except for the red glow from the stove. She could hear Wade breathing steadily from the floor, a reassuring sound that told her she was safe. She drifted back to sleep with a sense of peace she had not felt in months. When she woke again, pale gray light was filtering through the shuttered window, and the smell of coffee and frying bacon filled the air. Abigail sat up slowly, every muscle in her body protesting the movement. She felt like she had been trampled by a herd of cattle. Wade turned from the stove, a spatula in hand. "Morning. How are you feeling?" "Like I got run over by a wagon," Abigail admitted, pushing hair out of her face. She realized with embarrassment that her braid had come half undone, and she must look like something the cat dragged in. "That is better than how you looked yesterday," Wade said cheerfully. "Breakfast is almost ready. The storm passed in the night, so we should be able to head out after we eat." Abigail got up and made her way to the wash basin, splashing cold water on her face and trying to make herself presentable. Her hands were stiff and sore, the cuts from the wire standing out red and angry against her pale skin. Wade noticed her wincing as she tried to work her fingers. "Let me see," he said, abandoning the stove and coming over. He took her hands in his, examining them carefully. His touch was warm and sure, and Abigail felt that flutter in her stomach again. "These need to be bandaged properly. Sit down." He pulled a small medical kit from one of the shelves and proceeded to clean and wrap her hands with surprising skill. His touch was gentle but competent, and Abigail found herself studying his face as he worked. The morning stubble had darkened to a proper shadow, making him look roguish and handsome. The scar through his eyebrow gave him character, and his blue eyes were striking against his tanned skin. "You are good at this," she said, more to break the silence than anything. "Years of practice, Winakin," Wade replied. "When you work cattle, you get injured a lot." "I have set broken bones, stitched up knife wounds, dug out bullets, a few cuts or nothing." "Bullets?" Abigail asked, startled. Wade's mouth tightened. "The frontier is not always a friendly place. Sometimes you run into men who would rather steal than work." He finished wrapping her hands and stepped back. "There. Keep them clean and dry for a few days and they should heal up fine. They ate breakfast together and Abigail marveled at how comfortable it felt, sitting across from this man she had known less than a day. Conversation came easily, ranging from ranching to the weather to the growing settlement of La Junta. Wade had been working for the Triple Bar Ranch for 3 years, he told her, saving money and learning everything he could. His ultimate goal was to have his own spread someday, modest but successful. "What about you?" he asked. "Did you always want to be a rancher?" Abigail shrugged. "I never really thought about it. Growing up, it was just what we did. My father did not have a son, so he taught me everything he would have taught a boy. How to rope and ride, how to brand cattle, how to keep accounts. I think some people in town thought it was scandalous, a girl doing men's work, but Papa did not care what people thought." "Sounds like a smart man," Wade said. "He was," Abigail agreed quietly. "I miss him every day." They finished eating in companionable silence, then bundled up for the journey to Abigail's ranch. The storm had indeed passed, leaving behind a world transformed by snow. Everything was white and pristine, sparkling in the weak winter sun. The temperature had risen enough that the wind no longer felt life-threatening, though it was still bitterly cold. Wade had been true to his word about helping with the fence. They rode to where Abigail had been working the day before, and he made quick work of the remaining repairs. What would have taken her hours he accomplished in less than 45 minutes, his strong hands making the work look easy. Abigail helped as much as her bandaged hands allowed, and she found herself enjoying the teamwork, the easy rhythm of working alongside someone competent. When they were done, Wade accompanied her back to her ranch house. The place looked shabby in the bright snowlight. The paint peeling, the porch sagging slightly, the barn in need of repairs. Abigail saw it through his eyes and felt a wave of shame at how far the place had fallen. But Wade just nodded approvingly. "Good bones on this place. With some work, it could be real nice." "If I can keep it," Abigail said heavily. "The bank is expecting payment on my father's loan by the end of May. I need to sell cattle to make the payment, but prices have been terrible. I do not know if I'm going to have enough." Wade was quiet for a moment, his jaw working like he was chewing over a problem. Then he said, "What if I helped you? I have some money saved. I could buy a few head, pay you a fair price." "I could not take your money," Abigail said immediately. "It is not charity," Wade said firmly. "It is business. I have been wanting to start building my own herd anyway. This way, we both benefit." Abigail wanted to refuse on principle, but desperation made her pragmatic. "Let me think about it," she said finally. Wade nodded. "Fair enough. I should get back to the Triple Bar anyway. But I will come by in a few days to check on you if that's all right." "I would like that," Abigail said, and realized she meant it more than she had meant anything in a long time. Wade tipped his hat to her, that small smile playing at his lips again. "Until then, Miss Jensen." "Abigail," she said impulsively. "Just Abigail." "Abigail," Wade repeated, and the way he said her name, slow and deliberate, made her stomach flip. "I will see you soon." She stood on her porch and watched him ride away, a tall, solid figure on his buckskin horse, and felt something shift in her chest. For the first time since her father died, she did not feel quite so alone. True to his word, Wade came by 3 days later. Abigail heard the hoofbeats and looked up from the chicken coop she was cleaning, her heart doing an embarrassing leap when she recognized the rider. She had found herself thinking about him far too much over the past few days, remembering the way he had taken care of her, the warmth in his blue eyes, the gentleness of his touch. "Afternoon," Wade called out, swinging down from his saddle. He was carrying a bundle under one arm. "Brought you something." Abigail wiped her hands on her apron and came over, curious. Wade held out the bundle, which turned out to be a heavy wool coat, much nicer than the threadbare one she had been wearing. "I cannot accept this," Abigail started, but Wade cut her off. "Before you argue, it belonged to Tom Bailey's wife. She passed several years ago, and he kept her things in a trunk. When he died, everything came to me. I have no use for women's clothing, and it seems a shame to let good garments go to waste. Besides," he added with a slight smile in her, "I have a vested interest in making sure you do not freeze to death." The logic was sound, even if Abigail suspected he had gone out of his way to find an excuse to give her something she desperately needed. She took the coat, running her fingers over the thick wool. It was beautiful, well made, and warm, exactly what she needed for winter work. "Thank you," she said sincerely. "This is very generous." "There is more in my saddlebags," Wade admitted. "Some shirts, a couple of skirts, a good pair of boots. If you do not want them, that is fine, but they are yours if you do." Abigail felt her throat tighten. Pride warred with practicality, and for once, practicality won. "I want them," she said quietly, "and I am grateful. More than you know." Wade helped her carry the clothes inside, and Abigail was acutely aware of how shabby her house must look to him. The furniture was old and worn, the curtains faded, the whole place bearing the marks of too much work and not enough time or money for upkeep. But Wade did not seem to notice or care. He set the bags down on the kitchen table and looked around with interest. "Nice place," he said. "Reminds me of the house I grew up in." "It needs work," Abigail said, then bit her lip, not wanting to sound ungrateful. "All places need work," Wade said easily. "That is just part of living." He turned to face her, and his expression grew serious. "I have been thinking about your situation. I talked to my boss at the Triple Bar, and he is willing to buy some of your cattle at a fair price. Not trying to take advantage, just offering what they are worth. Between what he will pay and what I can afford, we might be able to get you most of the way to meeting that bank payment." Abigail stared at him, scarcely daring to hope. "You really talked to him about me?" "Of course I did," Wade said. "I told you I would help, and I meant it." "But why?" Abigail asked, the question bursting out of her. "Why do you care so much about helping me? You barely know me." Wade was quiet for a long moment, and when he spoke, his voice was low and intense. "Because from the moment I saw you out in that blizzard, stubborn and freezing and refusing to quit, I could not stop thinking about you. Because when I look at you, I see strength and courage and determination. Because when I am around you, I feel like I have found something I did not even know I was looking for." The words hung in the air between them, heavy with meaning. Abigail's heart was pounding so hard she was sure Wade must be able to hear it. No one had ever spoken to her like that, with such raw honesty. "Wade," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. He took a step closer, and then another, until he was standing right in front of her. He reached up slowly, giving her time to pull away, and tucked a loose strand of hair behind her ear. His fingers lingered on her cheek, warm and calloused, and infinitely gentle. "Tell me if I am reading this wrong," he said softly. "Tell me if you do not feel this too." "I feel it," Abigail admitted, her voice shaking. "I have been feeling it since you brought me to that line shack. I just did not think someone like you could be interested in someone like me." Wade's eyebrows drew together in confusion. "Someone like you? Abigail, you are the most incredible woman I have ever met." "I am a mess," Abigail said, emotion making her voice sharp. "I am broke. I am running a failing ranch. I am wearing borrowed clothes because mine are falling apart. What could you possibly want with me?" "Everything," Wade said simply. "I want everything with you." Then he was kissing her, and Abigail's world tilted on its axis. His lips were warm and sure, his arms coming around her to pull her close. She melted into him, her hands fisting in his shirt, kissing him back with all the loneliness and longing she had been carrying for months. It felt like coming home, like finding a safe harbor after a storm. It felt like possibility and promise, and everything she had not dared to dream about. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Wade rested his forehead against hers. "I know this is fast," he said. "I know we barely know each other. But I have never been more sure of anything in my life. I want to be with you, Abigail. I want to help you save this ranch. I want to build something with you." "I want that too," Abigail whispered, "but I'm scared. What if this does not work? What if we lose everything?" "Then we lose it together," Wade said, and we start over together. But I do not think we are going to lose. I think we are going to fight, and we are going to win because we are stronger together than we could ever be apart." Abigail laughed, a wet, slightly shaky sound. "You make it sound so simple." "Maybe it is," Wade said, brushing a tear from her cheek. "Maybe we are the ones making it complicated." They talked for hours that afternoon, sitting at her kitchen table over coffee, making plans and dreaming dreams. Wade would speak to his boss about buying cattle. Abigail would go to the bank and negotiate for more time if needed. They would work together to get the ranch back on its feet. And if things went well, if this thing between them was as real as it felt, they would think about making it permanent. Over the following weeks, Wade became a constant presence in Abigail's life. He would ride over after his work at the Triple Bar was done, helping her with repairs and chores. He brought food from the ranch cook, claiming they always made too much. He taught her better techniques for mending fence and roping cattle. And slowly, carefully, they built something together that was far more than just a working partnership. They talked about everything. Wade told her about his childhood in Missouri, about losing his parents to disease, about the hard years of drifting before Tom Bailey took him in. Abigail told him about her mother's death, about her father's slow descent into illness and debt after his accident, about the loneliness of being the only woman rancher in the area. They also learned each other in quieter ways. Wade learned that Abigail liked her coffee black and strong, that she hummed when she was concentrating, that she had a wicked sense of humor that caught him by surprise. Abigail learned that Wade was an early riser who greeted each day with optimism, that he was patient with animals and generous with his time, that he had a beautiful singing voice he only used when he thought no one was listening. And they courted. Old-fashioned, proper courting, despite the fact that they spent most of their time up to their elbows in ranch work. Wade brought her wildflowers that he found growing improbably in sheltered spots. Abigail baked him pies and bread with her dwindling supplies. They took rides together on clear days, exploring the boundaries of her land, and Wade would point out places where improvements could be made, always framing it as suggestions rather than criticism. The first time Wade kissed her in daylight, standing in her barn with sunlight streaming through the open doors, Abigail felt like she might float away with happiness. The second time, sitting on her porch steps watching the sunset, she was sure of it. By the 10th time, she could not remember what her life had been like before Wade Brennan rode into it. In early April, Wade's boss from the Triple Bar, a gruff but fair man named Samuel Cooper, came to look at Abigail's cattle. He walked through her small herd with a critical eye, checking teeth and hooves and general condition. When he was done, he made her an offer that was more than fair, enough to give her real hope of meeting the bank payment. "You have got good stock here, Miss Jensen," Cooper said, his weathered face approving. "Your father raised them right. With proper management, you could build this into a real operation." "Thank you, sir," Abigail said, trying to keep the emotion out of her voice. "That means a lot." Cooper glanced between her and Wade, who was standing close enough that their shoulders nearly touched. A knowing smile crossed the older man's face. "Wade here tells me you two have been working together. That true?" "Yes, sir," Wade said before Abigail could answer. "And if everything works out the way I hope, we are going to keep working together for a long time." Cooper chuckled. "I figured as much. Wade has not shut up about you since that blizzard. Half the ranch hands are taking bets on when he's going to propose." "Mr. Cooper!" Abigail felt her face flame red, but Wade just laughed. "They're going to win those bets sooner rather than later," Wade said, his blue eyes warm as they met hers. "I just have not found the right moment yet." Abigail's heart stuttered in her chest. They had talked around the idea of marriage, dancing close to it without quite touching the topic directly. Hearing Wade say it so openly, with such confidence, made it feel real and immediate and terrifying in the best way. Cooper left with half of Abigail's cattle, promising to send payment within the week. True to his word, a bank draft arrived 5 days later, and Abigail rode into La Junta with it clutched in her hand like a lifeline. Wade went with her, both for company and because he did not trust the banker Herbert Clemens not to try to cheat her. Clemens was a small, officious man with thinning hair and suspicious eyes. He looked over the bank draft with a frown, then consulted his ledgers. "This covers most of the outstanding loan," he said grudgingly, "but not all of it. You're still short by nearly $100. "I can get you the rest by the end of May," Abigail said, keeping her voice steady despite the fear curling in her stomach. "I have more cattle I can sell." "The loan comes due at the end of May," Clemens said. "If you cannot pay in full, I will have no choice but to foreclose." "She will pay," Wade said flatly, "and if there is any doubt, I will stand guarantee for the remainder." Clemens looked Wade up and down dismissively. "And what kind of guarantee could a ranch hand provide?" "The kind that comes from owning my own land free and clear," Wade said, his voice taking on an edge. "The kind that comes from having money in your own bank, Mr. Clemens? Or do you need me to pull out my account book and show you?" The banker's expression shifted from dismissive to calculating. Clearly, Wade's account was substantial enough to be worth considering. "Very well. I will note Mr. Brennan's guarantee in the file, but the full amount must be paid by May 31st, or I will proceed with foreclosure proceedings." They left the bank with Abigail feeling both relieved and frustrated. "I hate that man," she said as they walked to where their horses were tied. "He has been trying to get his hands on my land since my father died." "Well, he is not going to get it," Wade said firmly. "We will make the final payment even if I have to sell everything I own to do it." "I cannot let you do that," Abigail protested. Wade stopped walking and turned to face her, right there in the middle of La Junta's main street. He took both of her hands in his, looking down at her with an intensity that made her breath catch. "Abigail Jensen, I love you," he said, loud enough that several passers-by turned to look. "I have loved you since I found you half frozen in that blizzard. I love your strength and your stubbornness and the way you refuse to give up even when things seem impossible. I want to marry you. I want to combine our land and our resources and build something amazing together. So when I say I will do whatever it takes to save your ranch, I mean it, because it is going to be our ranch." Abigail was aware that they had an audience now, townspeople stopping to watch this unexpected spectacle. She did not care. All she could see was Wade, solid and real, and looking at her like she was the most important person in the world. "Yes," she said, her voice breaking with emotion. Wade's face split into a huge grin. "Yes, you love me? Or yes, you will marry me?" "Both," Abigail said, laughing and crying at the same time. "Yes to everything." Wade let out a whoop of joy and swept her up into his arms, spinning her around right there in the street. When he set her down, he kissed her thoroughly. To the scattered applause and catcalls of the watching crowd, Abigail kissed him back, not caring about propriety or what people would think. She was engaged to Wade Brennan, and suddenly the future looked bright and full of possibility. The next weeks passed in a blur of activity. Wade spoke to Samuel Cooper about leaving the Triple Bar, and while the older man was sorry to lose a good hand, he was happy for Wade. Cooper even gave him a generous bonus, telling Wade that a man starting a new life with a new wife could use all the help he could get. Wade moved his belongings to Abigail's ranch, and they worked together to prepare for their wedding. It would be a simple ceremony held at the small church in La Junta with just a few friends and neighbors. Neither of them cared about a big celebration. What mattered was making their commitment official and starting their life together. Abigail sold her remaining cattle strategically, keeping back a breeding stock for future growth and selling the rest to cover the final bank payment. Wade contributed money from his savings, and on May 28th, they walked into Herbert Clemens's office and paid off the loan in full. The banker's face was sour as he stamped the papers paid and handed over the deed, but Abigail did not care. The ranch was hers, free and clear, and soon it would belong to both her and Wade. They were married on June 5th, 1882. Abigail wore a simple dress of pale blue calico, her best garment, with wildflowers in her hair that Wade had picked that morning. Wade wore a new white shirt and his best trousers, his hair neatly combed, looking more handsome than any man had a right to be. They spoke their vows in front of Reverend Matthews, promising to love and cherish each other through whatever life brought their way. When the Reverend said, "You may kiss your bride," Wade pulled Abigail close and kissed her with a tenderness that made her eyes sting with happy tears. They were married. They were partners. They were going to face the future together. The wedding celebration was held at the ranch with Samuel Cooper and some of the Triple Bar hands joining a few neighbors for food and dancing. Someone brought a fiddle, and Wade surprised Abigail by being an excellent dancer, swinging her around the yard they had cleared for the occasion until she was breathless and laughing. As the sun set and the guests began to drift away, Wade took Abigail's hand and led her to the porch. They sat on the steps together watching the last light fade from the sky, and Abigail felt a contentment she had never known before. "Are you happy?" Wade asked, his arm around her shoulders. "Happier than I ever thought possible," Abigail said honestly. 6 months ago, I thought I was going to lose everything. Now I have more than I ever dreamed of." "We have more," Wade corrected gently. "This is ours now, Abigail. Your dreams are my dreams, and my dreams are yours." They sat in comfortable silence for a while, then Wade spoke again. "I have been thinking about the future, about what we want to build here." "Tell me," Abigail said, leaning into his warmth. "I think we should focus on breeding quality cattle," Wade said. "Not just raising them for beef, but developing a reputation for good stock. It will take time, maybe years, but I think we could make a name for ourselves. And I think we should add some horses too. Good working horses are always in demand." "I like that idea," Abigail said. "Papa always said horses were as important as cattle for a successful ranch." "And I want to build us a better house," Wade continued. "Not right away, we need to build up the herd first, but eventually something bigger and more comfortable. A real home where we can raise a family." Abigail felt her heart swell. "A family?" "If you want that," Wade said, a note of uncertainty creeping into his voice. "I know we have not talked about it much, but I have always wanted children. A whole house full of them, if I am being honest." "I want that too," Abigail said softly. "I used to imagine what it would be like, having brothers and sisters, being part of a big noisy family. It was lonely, being an only child." "Then that is what we will have," Wade said, pulling her closer and pressing a kiss to the top of her head. "We will fill this ranch with love and laughter and children. We will build something that lasts, something we can be proud of." Their first year of marriage was hard work but filled with joy. They rose before dawn and worked until after dark, repairing fences, tending cattle, breaking horses. Wade's knowledge of ranching combined with Abigail's intimate familiarity with her land made them an effective team. They made decisions together, argued occasionally, but always found compromise and celebrated small victories. The ranch began to show signs of real prosperity. The cattle they had kept as breeding stock produced healthy calves that spring. Wade bought 3 good mares and a quality stallion, starting the horse breeding program he had envisioned. They repaired the barn, fixed the porch, painted the house. Slowly but surely, the place began to look like a successful operation rather than a struggling homestead. In the fall of their first year together, Abigail realized she was pregnant. She told Wade one evening after supper, watching nervously for his reaction. His face went through a series of expressions, shock, wonder, and finally pure joy, before he let out a whoop and picked her up carefully, spinning her around just like he had done on the day they got engaged. "We are going to have a baby," he said, his voice full of awe. "Abigail, we are going to be parents." "Are you happy?" she asked, even though his reaction made the answer obvious. "Happy does not even begin to cover it," Wade said, setting her down gently and placing both hands on her still flat stomach. "This is everything I have ever wanted." Their son was born in May of 1883, arriving during a late spring storm that reminded Abigail of the blizzard where she and Wade had first met. The labor was long and difficult, with only the local midwife, Mrs. Patterson, to help. Wade paced outside like a caged animal, and when he finally heard the baby's first cry, he burst into the room despite Mrs. Patterson's protests about propriety. Abigail, exhausted but radiant, held their son in her arms. The baby had Wade's blue eyes and a shocking amount of dark hair. He was perfect, absolutely perfect. "What should we name him?" Wade asked, his voice hushed as he reached out to touch the baby's tiny hand. "I was thinking William," Abigail said, "after my father's middle name, William Jonas." "William Jonas Brennan," Wade repeated, and tears tracked down his weathered cheeks. "It is perfect. He is perfect." He leaned down and kissed Abigail's forehead. "You are amazing. Thank you for giving me this gift." William was a happy, healthy baby who grew into a rambunctious toddler with his father's easy smile and his mother's determined nature. Watching Wade with their son made Abigail fall even more in love with her husband. He was patient and playful, teaching William to ride almost before the boy could walk, showing him how to gentle horses and respect cattle. 2 years after William was born, they had a daughter they named Rose Abigail, with her mother's reddish hair and her father's blue eyes. She was followed 2 years later by another son, Thomas Samuel, named for both Tom Bailey and Samuel Cooper, the men who had believed in Wade when he had nothing. The ranch prospered as the years passed. The Brennan reputation for quality cattle and horses spread throughout southeastern Colorado. They hired on a few hands to help with the increased workload, and Wade trained them with the same patience Tom Bailey had shown him. They built the bigger house Wade had dreamed of, a solid structure with 4 bedrooms, a real kitchen, and a porch that wrapped around 2 sides. But more than the material success, it was the life they built together that mattered most. Their home was filled with laughter and love, with the chaos of children and animals, with the satisfaction of hard work and shared dreams. Wade and Abigail remained partners in every sense, making decisions together, supporting each other through difficult times, celebrating victories both large and small. On their 10th wedding anniversary, Wade took Abigail back to the line shack where he had brought her out of the blizzard. They left the children with Samuel Cooper, who had become like a grandfather to the kids, and rode out together, just the 2 of them. The line shack looked smaller than Abigail remembered, but it was still standing, still maintained as a shelter for triple bar riders. Wade had gotten permission to use it for the night, and he had already stocked it with food and firewood. They sat together on the porch steps as the sun set, just like they had done on their wedding night, and Wade took her hand. "Do you remember the day we met?" he asked. "How could I forget?" Abigail said, smiling. "I was half frozen and completely stubborn." "You were magnificent," Wade corrected. "I took one look at you out there in that storm, refusing to quit despite impossible odds, and I knew my life was about to change." "Mine did change," Abigail said. "You saved me, Wade, not just from the blizzard, but from losing everything, from being alone." "We saved each other," Wade said. "You gave me a home, a family, a purpose. You made all those years of wandering and loneliness worth it because they led me to you." Abigail leaned her head on his shoulder, looking out at the land they had built a life on. "I love you," she said, "more now than I did 10 years ago. And I did not think that was possible." "I love you too," Wade said, "and I will love you for the rest of my life and beyond." They spent the night in the line shack, talking and laughing and remembering, grateful for the blizzard that had brought them together, for the stubborn determination that had kept them fighting, for the love that had grown between them. The years continued to pass, bringing new challenges and new joys. William grew into a fine young man who shared his father's skill with horses and his mother's head for business. He eventually married a school teacher from Denver and brought her home to the ranch, where she quickly became part of the family. Rose surprised everyone by developing a passion for medicine, and with her parents' support, she went east to study nursing, one of the first women from the area to pursue higher education. Thomas followed in his father's footsteps, becoming a skilled cattleman with a reputation for fairness and integrity. Wade and Abigail became grandparents, delighting in the next generation while still working the ranch they loved. They slowed down as they aged, letting William and Thomas take over more of the daily operations, but they never stopped being partners, never stopped making decisions together. On a cold February day in 1912, exactly 30 years after Wade had found Abigail mending fences in a blizzard, they stood together on the porch of their home. Wade was 67 now, his sandy brown hair gone mostly gray, his body bent slightly from years of hard work. Abigail was 63, her red hair liberally streaked with white, her hands gnarled from arthritis. But when they looked at each other, they saw the young people they had been, full of hope and determination and love. "Hard to believe it has been 30 years, Abigail said, watching their grandchildren play in the yard. "Best 30 years of my life," Wade said, putting his arm around her waist in the same protective gesture he had used since the day they met. "Mine too," Abigail agreed. She looked out at the ranch, at the solid buildings and healthy livestock, at the family they had created. "We did it, Wade. We built something that will last." "We sure did," Wade said, "and it all started because you were too stubborn to come in out of a blizzard." Abigail laughed, the sound as bright as it had been when she was a young woman falling in love. "And because you were too stubborn to leave me out in it." They stood together as the sun set, surrounded by the life they had built, grateful for every moment, every challenge, every joy. The ranch would go on, passed down through generations, but it would always carry the love story of Wade and Abigail Brennan, the cowboy who found a woman mending fences in a blizzard and took her somewhere warm, and the woman who had been brave enough to let herself be saved and strong enough to save him right back. Their love had started in a storm and had weathered every storm that followed. It had grown deeper with each passing year, strengthened by shared struggles and shared triumphs. They had built not just a ranch, but a legacy, not just a family, but a foundation that would endure long after they were gone. As darkness fell and they went inside to join their family for dinner, Wade pulled Abigail close one more time. "Thank you," he whispered against her hair. "For what?" Abigail asked. "For being stubborn enough to survive that blizzard," Wade said. "For being brave enough to accept help. For choosing me. For building this life with me. For everything." Abigail reached up and cupped his weathered face in her arthritic hands, looking into the blue eyes that still made her heart skip a beat. "Thank you for stopping me that day. Thank you for taking me somewhere warm. Thank you for loving me." "Always," Wade promised, just as he had promised 30 years ago. "I will always love you." And surrounded by the warmth of family, the glow of lamplight, and the knowledge that they had built something truly special together, Wade and Abigail Brennan sat down to dinner, grateful for every moment of the extraordinary, ordinary life they had created from a chance meeting in a blizzard and the courage to believe in love. The ranch continued to thrive under William and Thomas's management, with their children eventually taking over in turn. But it was always known as the Brennan place, founded by Wade and Abigail, built on love and determination and the unshakable belief that together they could overcome anything. Their story was told and retold to each new generation, a reminder that sometimes the best things in life come from the most unexpected places, and that true love, once found, can weather any storm and last beyond a lifetime.